Maya Richardson was 17 when she made the announcement that would change everything. It happened on a Tuesday evening right after dinner, when her family was still sitting around the kitchen table. The dishes were piled in the sink, and her father was reading the local newspaper like he did every night. Her mother was sorting through bills, her face showing that familiar worried expression she always wore when looking at numbers. Maya took a deep breath and said it. She wanted to be a fashion designer. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Her father looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. Her mother stopped mid-count, a stack of envelopes still in her hand. Her older brother let out a laugh, the kind that wasn't really funny, more like disbelief mixed with pity. Her father spoke first. He was a factory worker, had been for 30 years. His hands were rough and calloused from operating machinery, and he took pride in his steady paycheck, in never missing a day of work. He folded his newspaper carefully and looked at his daughter with tired eyes. "Maya, that's not realistic. You need to think about your future." Her mother nodded in agreement. She worked as a cashier at the grocery store, and between both their incomes they managed to keep the family afloat, barely. Dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford, and they'd raised their children to understand that. "What about accounting?" her mother suggested. "Or maybe nursing? Those are good, stable jobs. You could have a real career." But Maya had been sketching since she was 8 years old. While other kids played outside, she filled notebooks with dress designs, outfit combinations, fabric patterns she imagined in her head. She'd made clothes for her dolls from scraps of fabric, then started altering her own thrift store finds. Fashion wasn't just something she wanted to do. It felt like the only thing she was supposed to do. The next day at school, things didn't get any better. Maya had an appointment with her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, to discuss college applications. She walked into that small office with hope, carrying a portfolio of her best sketches tucked under her arm. Mrs. Patterson was known for being practical. She'd been a counselor at the school for 23 years and had seen hundreds of students come through. She believed in realistic expectations and secure futures. When Maya explained her plan to attend design school in the city, Mrs. Patterson actually sighed. It was the kind of sigh adults give when they think you're being foolishly naive. "Listen, Maya, I'm going to be honest with you because that's my job." She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. "Girls from our town don't become fashion designers. That's just not how it works. Do you know how competitive that industry is? Do you have any idea how much those schools cost?" Maya tried to show her the sketches, but Mrs. Patterson barely glanced at them. "These are nice, really, but nice isn't enough. You need to think practically. What's your backup plan? Have you considered community college? You could get your basics done there, save some money, and then reassess." Maya left that office with her portfolio still unopened and a heavy feeling in her chest, but something inside her refused to accept it. Maybe that's what made her different. Most people in her town learned to lower their expectations, to fit their dreams into the shape of what was possible. Maya couldn't do that. Her friends didn't help either. That weekend, she met up with the group she'd known since middle school at the diner where they always hung out. When she brought up design school again, trying to find someone who might understand, they exchanged looks. Her best friend Lisa spoke up first. "Maya, come on, be real. You're going to move to the city and become some famous designer? That's like saying you're going to be a movie star." The others laughed, not cruelly exactly, but in that way that made it clear they thought she was delusional. "What's wrong with staying here?" another friend asked. "My sister went to college for art and now she works at a call center because she couldn't find a job. At least here we know people. We have connections." But connections in a small factory town meant factory jobs, retail positions, maybe office work if you were lucky. It meant a life that looked exactly like your parents' lives and their parents before them. It meant safety, sure, but it also meant giving up before you even started. Maya started working double shifts at the diner where she'd had her part-time job since sophomore year. She served coffee to the same people every morning, cleaned tables, smiled when customers were rude, and saved every single dollar she could. Her feet ached by the end of each shift. She smelled like grease and coffee, and there were nights she came home so tired she fell asleep in her clothes. But she was saving for application fees, for a plane ticket to visit schools, for a future that everyone said was impossible. Her family watched this with growing frustration. Her father would shake his head when she left for another shift instead of spending time with them. Her mother worried out loud that Maya was working herself too hard, that she was throwing away her youth chasing something that would only break her heart. "You're being selfish," her brother told her one night. "You think you're better than us? Too good for a normal job?" That hurt more than anything. Because Maya didn't think she was better. She just thought she was different. She had this fire inside her that wouldn't go out, no matter how many people tried to blow it away with their doubts and their practical advice. The worst part was the loneliness. When everyone around you is telling you that your dream is stupid, that you're wasting your time, that you're going to fail and embarrass yourself, it's hard to keep believing. There were nights Maya lay in bed, exhausted from work, and wondered if they were right. Maybe she was being foolish. Maybe she should just accept the life that was available to her and stop fighting so hard. But then morning would come, and she'd see her sketches pinned to her bedroom wall, and something in her would strengthen again. She'd worked on those designs late into the night, creating with a passion that felt bigger than logic, bigger than fear. How could something that felt so right be wrong? She started applying to design schools in secret, filling out applications in the diner during slow hours, writing essays about why she wanted to study fashion, what it meant to her. She didn't tell anyone. She couldn't bear to hear another lecture about being realistic, another warning about disappointment. The responses started coming in spring. Rejections mostly, which she'd expected. The competition was fierce, and she was a girl from nowhere with no connections, no impressive background, just raw talent and desperate hope. But then one acceptance letter arrived. A design school in the city. Not the most prestigious one, but real and official and possible. They offered her a small scholarship. Not enough to cover everything, but enough to make it almost within reach if she kept saving. Maya held that letter in her hands and cried. Not because people believed in her now. They still didn't. But because she'd believed in herself enough to try, and trying had opened a door. The real battle was just beginning. Maya moved to the city on a Wednesday morning in late August. She'd packed everything she owned into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Her mother cried at the bus station, but her father just stood there with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He hadn't said much since she'd announced she was actually going through with this. "You'll be back in 6 months, he said quietly, just before she boarded. Not meanly, but like he was stating a fact. Like gravity or the weather. Maya wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but she was too scared to waste energy on words. She just hugged her mother one more time and got on that bus. The apartment she'd found online was worse than the pictures suggested. It was a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where sirens were the evening soundtrack. She was sharing it with 2 other girls, and her room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a small desk. The walls were thin enough that she could hear every conversation, every argument, every sound from the apartments around her. But it was hers. Sort of. Her roommates were fine at first. There was Kelly, who worked at a bar and came home at 3 in the morning, and Jasmine, who was studying photography and kept irregular hours. They seemed nice enough during the first week, friendly even. Maya's savings from the diner covered her first month's rent, the deposit, and left her with about $800. That had to last until she found work, and she needed to find work fast. Design school didn't start for 3 more weeks, but the city was expensive in ways she hadn't fully understood. A sandwich cost $12. The subway card she needed for transportation ate up chunks of money daily. She found her first job within a week, washing dishes at a small restaurant in Chinatown. The owner paid cash, which meant no taxes taken out, and Maya worked the evening shift 5 to midnight. The work was hot and monotonous, her hands constantly in scalding water, her back aching from standing over industrial sinks, but it was money. Her second job came from a posting on the school's student board. A boutique in the fashion district needed someone to steam clothes and help with inventory. The pay was minimum wage, but Maya would be around fashion, around the industry she was trying to break into. She took the morning shift, 8 to 1, which meant she was working split shifts with barely any time to rest in between. When classes started, Maya added them into her already impossible schedule. She attended lectures in the afternoon, exhausted from her morning job knowing she had to be at the restaurant by 5. She did homework on the subway, studied while eating instant ramen in her tiny room, and survived on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. Her design professors were brilliant but demanding. They expected polished work, creative thinking, and constant improvement. Maya's classmates came from different backgrounds. Some had parents who worked in fashion, who'd grown up going to fashion shows and understanding the industry from the inside. They talked about designers and brands Maya had never heard of, used terms she had to look up later. She felt behind from day one, but she worked harder. While other students went out on weekends, Maya was at her jobs or in the school studio, practicing draping techniques, learning to use industrial sewing machines, perfecting her sketches. Her relationship with David, her boyfriend from back home, started falling apart around October. He'd been supportive at first, or at least he'd said he was, but the distance and her schedule made communication almost impossible. When she finally had time to call, he'd be at work. When he called, she'd be in class or at one of her jobs. "You're never available anymore," he complained during one of their rare phone conversations. "It's like you don't even care." "I'm trying to build something," Maya said, her voice tired. "This isn't forever. Once I get established." "Established? Maya, you're killing yourself. You sound exhausted all the time. Is this really worth it?" That question hung in the air between them. Maya didn't have an answer that would satisfy him, because the truth was complicated. Yes, she was exhausted. Yes, she was struggling. But every time she created something in class, every time a professor nodded at her work with approval, something inside her lit up in a way nothing else ever had. They broke up 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. David said he couldn't do it anymore, couldn't compete with her ambitions, couldn't watch her destroy herself for a dream that might never happen. He said it gently, but it still hurt. Maya cried for exactly 20 minutes in her room, then dried her eyes and went to her evening shift at the restaurant. She couldn't afford to fall apart. December brought new problems. She came home one evening to find her apartment door ajar. Her stomach dropped. Inside, everything was chaos. Drawers pulled open, belongings scattered across the floor. They'd taken her laptop, the cheap one she'd bought used for schoolwork. They'd taken the small television the roommates shared. And worst of all, they'd found the envelope where Maya kept her cash savings, about $600 she'd managed to save for spring semester expenses. Gone. All of it. Maya sat on her bed and stared at the wall. She didn't cry this time. She was too numb, too exhausted to produce tears. Kelly and Jasmine came home to the same scene, and they all filed a police report that everyone knew wouldn't lead anywhere. Burglaries like this happened constantly in their neighborhood. "My parents said I could move back home," Kelly mentioned a few days later. "They're worried about the safety here." Maya didn't have that option. Going home meant admitting defeat, meant facing her father's "I told you so," meant giving up on everything she'd worked for. So she stayed, got a chain lock for her door, and started keeping any money she had on her person at all times. She picked up a third job in January, weekend mornings at a coffee shop. Now she was working nearly every available hour between classes. Sleep became something she did in 3 or 4 hour chunks, stolen between obligations. She developed chronic headaches from stress and lack of rest. Her hands were raw from constant work, her body running on caffeine and stubbornness. Her grades were suffering too. Not failing, but not excellent either. She didn't have time to give her projects the attention they deserved. One professor pulled her aside after class, concern in his eyes. "Your work shows real potential, Maya, but you seem distracted lately. Is everything all right?" She wanted to laugh. Was everything all right? She was working 3 jobs, barely sleeping, eating 1 meal a day to save money, and living in an apartment that had been broken into twice now. No, everything was definitely not all right. But she smiled and said, "I'm fine, just adjusting to the workload." The professor didn't look convinced, but he let it go. February was when Jasmine stole from her. Maya had suspected for weeks that money was going missing. Small amounts from her wallet, never enough to be certain. Then one day she came home early from a canceled class and found Jasmine going through her backpack. The confrontation was ugly. Jasmine admitted she'd taken maybe $150 total over the past months. She cried and apologized and said she was behind on bills, that she was desperate. But Maya was desperate too, and she'd never stolen from anyone. Jasmine moved out that week, and Maya and Kelly found another roommate, someone neither of them really knew. The apartment felt even less like home now, just a place to crash between work and school. But then something shifted in March. Maya's final project for her design fundamentals class was a jacket she'd spent weeks perfecting. She'd used techniques she learned in class combined with her own instincts, creating something that felt both technically sound and uniquely hers. The fabric was inexpensive because that's all she could afford, but she'd chosen it carefully and the construction was flawless. When she presented it to the class, something happened. The room got quiet in a different way. Her professor examined every seam, every detail, then looked at her with an expression she'd never seen from him before. "Respect. This is exceptional work," he said. "This is professional quality." After class, he asked her to stay. He knew a woman named Rita Chen who owned a small boutique in the East Village, someone who featured emerging designers. He thought Rita might be interested in seeing Maya's work. Maya's hands trembled as she wrote down the contact information. This was the first door opening, the first sign that maybe, just maybe, she'd been right to keep pushing when everyone said to quit. She called Rita that same evening, her voice shaking with nervousness and hope. "Come by tomorrow," Rita said after Maya explained who'd referred her. "Bring whatever you've got." Maya hung up and sat on her bed in that tiny room in that sketchy apartment, exhausted and broke and running on fumes. But something inside her, that stubborn fire that had gotten her this far, burned a little brighter. She was still climbing, still struggling, but she was climbing towards something real now. The city hadn't broken her yet. Maybe it wouldn't get the chance. Rita Chen's boutique was nothing like Maya had imagined. It was small, tucked between a bookstore and a vintage record shop, with a window display that featured clothes Maya actually wanted to wear. Inside, the space smelled like sandalwood and possibility. Rita herself was in her 40s, wearing an outfit that somehow made jeans and a simple blazer look like high fashion. She looked up from her laptop when Maya walked in, portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield. "You're the student Professor Martinez told me about." Maya nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look. She'd come straight from her morning shift at the boutique where she steamed clothes, still wearing her work outfit, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Rita gestured to the counter. "Show me what you've got." Maya spread out her sketches, photographs of pieces she'd made, fabric swatches she'd been collecting. Her hands shook slightly as Rita examined everything with a critical eye, saying nothing. The silence stretched out so long that Maya was certain this was a waste of time, that she'd misread the professor's enthusiasm. Then Rita looked up. "Your aesthetic is interesting. Raw but refined. There's an edge here that I don't see in a lot of student work. How fast can you produce?" The question caught Maya off guard. "What do you mean?" "I want to feature 4 pieces from an emerging designer next month. If you can create a small collection, 4 coordinating pieces, I'll give you window space and floor space. I can't pay you up front, but you get 70% of sales." Maya's heart hammered in her chest. This was real. This was actually happening. "I can do it," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can definitely do it." The next 4 weeks were the hardest of Maya's life, and that was saying something considering what she'd already been through. She cut back on her restaurant hours, which meant less money but more time to create. She worked in the school studio until security kicked her out at midnight, then continued at home, her sewing machine running until 3 or 4 in the morning. She survived on instant coffee and granola bars. Sleep became something she did in 2-hour shifts. Her roommate Kelly complained about the noise of the sewing machine at night, but Maya was too focused to care. This was her shot, maybe her only shot, and she wasn't going to waste it. The collection came together piece by piece. A jacket with asymmetrical lines that she'd reconstructed from thrifted materials. A dress that combined structured tailoring with flowing fabric in a way that felt both edgy and elegant. Pants that fit like they'd been custom made for movement. A top that could be styled 3 different ways. She brought the finished pieces to Rita on a Tuesday morning, each one carefully pressed and hung. Rita examined them for what felt like hours, trying each piece on a mannequin, checking seams and stitching, considering how they worked together. "These are good," Rita finally said. "Really good. We'll feature them starting Friday." That Friday, Maya stood outside Rita's boutique window and stared at her own designs on display. Her name was written on a small card. Maya Richardson, emerging designer. It didn't matter that it was a small boutique, or that most people walking by didn't even glance at the window. She'd done it. Her work was out there in the world, real and tangible. The first piece sold within a week. Then another. Rita called her with updates, and each time Maya's phone rang with good news, she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't delusional. She wasn't wasting her time. She was actually building something. By the end of her second year in design school, Maya had pieces in 3 different boutiques. The money wasn't huge, but it was enough that she could quit one of her jobs. She chose to leave the restaurant, which meant her evenings were suddenly her own again. She could sleep 5, sometimes 6 hours a night. She could eat 2 meals a day. Her work caught the attention of a local fashion blogger who featured her designs in a post about emerging sustainable fashion. Maya had started using reclaimed and thrifted materials, not just because she believed in sustainability, but because she couldn't afford new fabric. But the blogger framed it as an intentional artistic choice, and suddenly, people were interested in that aspect of her work. More opportunities followed. A small pop-up market where she could sell directly to customers, a feature in a local arts magazine, an invitation to participate in a student fashion show that would have industry professionals in attendance. Maya was 23 when things really started to change. She'd graduated from design school with a strong portfolio and a growing reputation. A businesswoman named Patricia Liu approached her after a show, handed her a business card, and said she wanted to discuss investment opportunities. They met for coffee the next week. Patricia was smart and direct, and she'd done her research on Maya's work. She believed in the sustainable fashion angle, thought Maya's designs had commercial potential, and was willing to invest $50,000 for a 20% stake in a business that didn't officially exist yet. Maya said yes before she'd even thought it through completely. Within 6 months, Maya had her own small label. Nothing huge, just her designing and producing limited runs of pieces, but it was hers. She had Maya Richardson designs printed on labels that went into every garment. She had a tiny studio space in a building she shared with other artists. She had orders coming in faster than she could fill them. The local press loved her story. Small town girl makes it in the big city. They wrote articles about her journey, though they cleaned it up, made it sound more romantic than it had been. They didn't mention the break-ins or the stealing roommate or the nights she'd cried from exhaustion. They just focused on the determination and the success. When a magazine from her hometown wanted to do a feature on her, calling her an inspiration to local youth, Maya agreed. Part of her wanted to say no, wanted to tell them where they could put their feature considering how they'd treated her dreams 5 years ago. But another part of her, the part that still remembered being 17 and desperate for someone to believe in her, said yes. She went back home for the photo shoot on a Saturday in October. The magazine wanted shots of her in the town, showing where she came from. They photographed her outside her old high school, in front of the factory where her dad had worked for decades, walking down Main Street where she'd worked at the diner. Everyone in town suddenly knew who she was. People who'd never spoken to her before stopped her on the street to congratulate her. The guidance counselor from her high school, Mrs. Patterson, showed up to the photo shoot and told the reporter she'd always known Maya had something special. Maya smiled for the cameras but felt nothing. Where were these people when she'd needed them? When she'd been terrified and alone, trying to figure out if she was brave or just stupid? They told her to be realistic, to give up, to settle for less. And now they wanted to celebrate her success as if they'd been supporting her all along. Her father showed up toward the end of the shoot. He looked older than she remembered, more tired. The factory had laid off a third of its workers the year before, and he'd barely kept his job. He stood at a distance, watching, his hands in his pockets. When the photographer took a break, Maya walked over to him. They hadn't spoken much since she'd left. A few phone calls on holidays, surface-level conversations that avoided anything real. Hey, Dad, hey. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. You did good, kid. You really did it. She waited for the satisfaction, for the I told you so that she'd earned. But standing there in front of her father, seeing how much older he looked, how worn down by years of factory work, she didn't feel victorious. She felt sad. Sad that this was what it took for him to say he was proud. Sad that they'd lost years of a relationship because he couldn't support her dream. Thanks, she said quietly. Your mother wants you to come by for dinner before you leave. Maya agreed, though part of her wanted to say no, wanted to get back on the bus and return to the city where people didn't remind her of who she used to be. That night at dinner, sitting in her childhood kitchen with her parents and brother, Maya realized something that made her stomach turn. She'd won. She'd proved everyone wrong. Her designs were selling, her name was being recognized, and she was making actual money doing what she loved. But she felt empty. She looked at her mother's hopeful smile, heard her father's awkward attempts at showing interest in her work, and felt like she was watching strangers. She'd been gone 5 years, but it felt like 50. She'd changed so much, sacrificed so much, that she didn't even recognize the girl who used to sit at this table. Her brother asked about her apartment, and Maya described her studio space, the neighborhood she'd moved to, the coffee shop downstairs that she loved. She made it sound good because it was good. She'd worked hard for everything she had, but she left out the panic attacks she'd started having, the way she woke up at 3 in the morning with her heart racing, terrified that everything would fall apart, the fact that she couldn't remember the last time she'd gone on a date or spent a day doing nothing, the way her hands shook sometimes from stress and too much caffeine. She left out the fact that success felt like running on a treadmill that kept getting faster, and she couldn't figure out how to slow it down without falling off completely. After dinner, Maya hugged her mother goodbye and caught the last bus back to the city. She spent the 2-hour ride staring out the window at the darkness, wondering when exactly winning had started to feel so much like losing. Maya was 32 when she opened her flagship store. It was in a neighborhood that had been run down 5 years ago but was now trendy, full of organic cafes and art galleries. The store had floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick walls, and her designs displayed like art pieces. The grand opening was covered by 3 fashion magazines and 2 local news stations. She stood in the middle of her store that first day, surrounded by people congratulating her, holding a glass of champagne she hadn't taken a sip from, and felt completely disconnected from the moment. It was like watching herself from outside her body. This should have been the happiest day of her life. Instead, she just felt tired. The business had grown faster than she'd ever imagined. She had 12 employees now. Her designs were being worn by minor celebrities and featured in magazines she used to buy at the drugstore and dream about. She'd done a TED Talk about sustainable fashion and entrepreneurship that got over 1 million views. Her Instagram had 150,000 followers who hung on every post. She was making more money in a year than her father had made in a decade. She had a nice apartment, could afford good food, could buy things without checking her bank account first. By every measure that mattered to the world, she'd made it. But the panic attacks were getting worse. The first one had happened 2 years ago, at a fashion industry event. She'd been networking, smiling, shaking hands when suddenly her chest got tight and she couldn't breathe. She'd excused herself to the bathroom and spent 20 minutes on the floor of a stall, trying to convince herself she wasn't dying. She'd told herself it was a one-time thing. Stress. Too much coffee. Not enough sleep. But they kept happening. Once a month, then once a week, then seemingly at random, triggered by things she couldn't predict. An email, a deadline, sometimes nothing at all. She started seeing a therapist in January. Dr. Chen was patient and kind, and she didn't seem impressed by Maya's success, which was almost refreshing. Everyone else in Maya's life treated her like she'd achieved something magical, like she should be grateful and happy every single moment. Dr. Chen just asked how she was feeling. Exhausted, Maya admitted during their 3rd session. I feel exhausted all the time, even when I sleep, which isn't often. Tell me about your typical day. Maya walked her through it. She woke up at 6, checked emails before getting out of bed, went to the gym because everyone said exercise was important for stress, got to the studio by 8:30. She spent the day designing, managing production, handling business decisions, putting out fires. She took meetings with buyers, with press, with potential investors. She checked her social media constantly because that's what successful businesses did. She usually left the studio around 7, brought work home, kept working until midnight or later. Then she'd lie in bed, mind racing, until she finally fell asleep around 2 or 3 in the morning. When do you rest? Dr. Chen asked. Maya blinked. I just told you. I sleep from like 3 to 6. That's not rest. That's collapsing from exhaustion. When do you do something? Just because it brings you joy. When do you see friends? Maya tried to remember the last time she'd seen someone socially. There was a dinner 3 months ago with another designer, but that had been networking. Before that, she honestly couldn't remember. I don't really have time for that right now, Maya said. Maybe once things settle down. Dr. Chen looked at her with something like sadness. Maya, things are never going to settle down unless you make them settle down. You've built a machine that requires constant feeding. The question is, what happens when you run out of things to feed it? That session stayed with Maya. She found herself thinking about it at weird times in the middle of meetings or while reviewing designs. She'd built a machine. That's exactly what it felt like. And she was the fuel. The national magazine feature happened in March. It was a big deal. A 6-page spread with professional photos and a long interview about her journey from small-town girl to successful designer. They wanted to shoot it in her hometown to show the contrast between where she started and where she ended up. Maya agreed, even though going home always left her feeling strange and hollow. The photographer wanted shots of her at the factory. Not inside because it was still operational, but outside with those massive brick buildings in the background. The factory where her father had spent 30 years of his life, where her grandfather had worked before him. She stood there in one of her own designs, a structured blazer that cost $400, while the photographer clicked away. The factory workers were on lunch break and some of them stood outside smoking, watching the photo shoot with curious expressions. Maya wondered what they thought of her. Did they see her as someone who'd escaped or as someone who'd abandoned them? Did they resent her success or were they inspired by it? She'd never know because there was this invisible wall between her and them now, built from money and opportunity and a life they couldn't relate to. Her father showed up near the end of the shoot. He wasn't supposed to be there, but her mother must have told him about it. He looked even older than during her last visit, moving slower. Maya later learned he'd been diagnosed with early-onset dementia 6 months ago, something her mother had mentioned in passing during a phone call that Maya had only half listened to because she'd been checking emails at the same time. "Hey, Dad," she said, walking over during a break. He smiled, but there was a vagueness in his eyes that scared her. "Maya, you look good. Very professional, thanks. How are you feeling?" "Oh, fine. Your mother worries too much." He looked around at the photo crew, the equipment, the magazine people checking their phones. "All this is for you?" "Yeah, they're doing a feature on the business." He nodded slowly like he was processing information through fog. "That's good. That's real good. You're doing better than I ever did." Something about the way he said it broke her heart. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a statement of fact. She was doing better. She'd escaped the life that had worn him down, ground him into exhaustion, left him with nothing but a pension that barely covered his medications. "Dad, She didn't know what she wanted to say. That she was sorry. That she wished things had been different. That sometimes she felt guilty for wanting more than what he'd had. "I'm proud of you," he said, and this time his eyes focused, clear and present. "I know I didn't handle it right when you were younger. I was scared. Scared you'd fail and get hurt. Scared you'd succeed and leave us behind. Guess both those things happened in a way." Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of the magazine people and the photographer and the factory workers watching from a distance. Her mother appeared then, coming to collect her father, apologizing for the interruption. Maya watched them walk away, her father's steps uncertain, her mother's hand on his elbow to steady him. They looked small against the massive factory buildings. Two people who'd spent their entire lives in one place while she'd run as far and fast as she could. That night, Maya had the worst panic attack yet. She was back in her hotel room, the nice one the magazine was paying for, looking over the preliminary shots the photographer had shown her. She looked successful in the photos, confident, like someone who'd figured everything out and something inside her just snapped. Her heart started racing. The room felt too small. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except sit on the floor with her back against the bed and try to remember how to pull air into her lungs. It lasted over an hour, waves of terror and physical symptoms that made her certain she was having a heart attack. She called 911. The ambulance came, lights flashing which brought out neighbors and created a small scene that Maya would be mortified about later. The paramedics were kind, checking her vitals, asking questions. Her heart was racing but steady. Her blood pressure was elevated but not dangerous. Physically, she was fine. "Looks like a panic attack," one of them said gently. "Have you been under a lot of stress lately?" Maya almost laughed. Stress, that was one word for it. They took her to the emergency room anyway, just to be safe. She spent 4 hours in a bed with a curtain around it, listening to the sounds of the ER, while doctors ran tests and found nothing physically wrong with her. The doctor who discharged her suggested she follow up with her regular physician and consider talking to a therapist. about anxiety management. She didn't tell anyone about the ER visit. Not her mother, not her employees, not Dr. Chen in their next session. She was embarrassed, like the panic attack was a personal failure, proof that she couldn't handle what she'd built. The magazine article came out 6 weeks later. It was beautiful. The photos were stunning. The interview made her sound wise and inspiring. They called her a testament to the power of believing in yourself and proof that determination can overcome any obstacle. Maya read it 3 times, looking for herself in those words, in that person they'd created, but she didn't recognize her. The woman in the article was confident and fulfilled, someone who'd achieved her dreams and was living her best life. The real Maya was barely sleeping, having panic attacks, and taking pills prescribed by a doctor who'd looked concerned when she'd described her symptoms. The real Maya sometimes sat in her beautiful apartment and wondered what it had all been for. Her phone buzzed constantly with congratulations about the article. People she hadn't spoken to in years reaching out to say how inspired they were, former classmates saying they always knew she'd make it. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, even sent a message saying she'd saved the article to show students as an example of perseverance. Maya wanted to scream. She wanted to write back and tell them the truth. That success felt like drowning in slow motion. That she'd given up everything, her relationships, her health, her peace of mind, and she still didn't feel like it was enough. That the machine she'd built demanded more and more and more, and she didn't know how to stop feeding it without watching everything collapse. But instead, she typed back variations of, "Thank you so much," and posted the article to her Instagram with a caption about gratitude and hard work. Because that's what you did when you'd proved everyone wrong. You smiled and pretended that winning felt like they'd told you it would. You kept the truth to yourself, locked it away in the parts of you that couldn't breathe anymore, and you kept going. Because stopping meant admitting that maybe they'd been right about one thing. Maybe the price of her dreams really had been too high. Maya didn't quit fashion. That thought crossed her mind plenty of times during those dark months after the emergency room. But walking away completely felt like admitting that everyone who doubted her had been right all along. Instead, she did something that felt even scarier. She admitted she needed help. The therapist's office was in a building not far from her studio. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 50s who didn't seem impressed by Maya's success story, which was oddly refreshing. Everyone else treated her accomplishments like they erased all the struggle, like success was some magic cure for everything that hurt. "Tell me about the panic attack," Dr. Chen said during their first session. Maya described that night in her childhood bedroom, the feeling of her chest tightening, of not being able to breathe, of being certain she was dying. She'd achieved everything she'd set out to do. But standing in that room, surrounded by evidence of who she used to be, she'd broken down completely. "I kept thinking about all the things I'd missed," Maya said. "All the years I didn't come home. My grandmother's funeral that I attended on a video call because I couldn't miss Fashion Week. The friendships I let die because I didn't have time for them. And I realized I'd been so focused on proving everyone wrong that I forgot to build a life I actually wanted to live in." Dr. Chen listened without judgment, without telling Maya she should be grateful for her success. Instead, she asked questions that Maya had been avoiding for years. What did she actually want? Not what she thought she should want. Not what would prove her worth, but what would make her happy. Maya didn't have an answer at first. She'd been running so long that she'd forgotten there was supposed to be a destination beyond just making it. The changes started small. Maya hired a studio manager named Ben, someone to handle the day-to-day operations of her business. It felt impossible at first, letting go of control, trusting someone else to manage orders and inventory and customer communications. She'd done everything herself for so long that delegation felt like failure. But Ben was good at his job. And slowly Maya realized that her business didn't collapse just because she wasn't working 18-hour days. In fact, with someone else handling operations, she could focus more on the actual design work, the part she'd loved from the beginning. She cut her production schedule too. Instead of constantly churning out new pieces to keep up with demand, she decided to work in seasonal collections. Quality over quantity. It meant potentially less money, but it also meant she could breathe, could take time to create pieces she was actually proud of, instead of just producing content to feed the machine. The fashion industry didn't love this decision. There were articles questioning if she was losing her edge, if the hunger that had driven her early work was gone. One blogger wrote that she seemed to be coasting on past success rather than pushing forward. Maya read those articles and felt the old panic rising. The voice in her head that said she had to work harder, produce more, prove herself constantly. But then she'd remember sitting in that emergency room, remember the emptiness she'd felt despite all her achievements, and she'd close her laptop and go for a walk instead. She started a mentorship program that summer. It began with one student, a girl named Keisha from a small town in the Midwest who'd reached out through Instagram, asking for advice about design school. Maya agreed to meet her for coffee, expecting it to be a one-time thing, but talking to Keisha reminded Maya of herself at 17. The desperate hope mixed with fear, the certainty that she had to do this even though everyone said it was impossible. Maya found herself meeting with Keisha regularly, looking at her portfolio, giving her actual useful advice instead of empty encouragement. "My parents think I'm crazy," Keisha said during one of their meetings. "They say fashion isn't a real career." Maya smiled, remembering. Mine said the same thing. They weren't trying to be mean. They were just scared for me, and they didn't understand what I was trying to do. "Do you talk to them now? Your parents?" The question hit harder than Maya expected. She and her parents spoke occasionally, surface-level conversations that avoided anything deep. The wound of their early lack of support had never really healed, and Maya had built walls to protect herself from their judgment. "Not as much as I should," Maya admitted. "That's something I'm working on." She started calling her mother more often after that conversation. Not just quick check-ins on holidays, but real calls where they actually talked. It was awkward at first. Years of distance didn't dissolve overnight. But slowly they found their way towards something that felt like a relationship again. Her mother admitted during one call that she'd regretted not supporting Maya's dreams more openly. "I was so scared you'd fail and get hurt," she said. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know," Maya said, and she meant it. She'd spent years angry at her parents for not believing in her, but therapy had helped her understand that they'd been operating from their own fears and limitations. They'd done the best they could with what they knew. That didn't erase the hurt, but it made it easier to carry. Maya reached out to Mrs. Rodriguez, her old high school art teacher. Not Mrs. Patterson, the guidance counselor who'd told her girls from their town didn't become designers, but Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been the one person who'd quietly encouraged her to pursue art, who'd let her stay after school to work in the art room. They met for lunch when Maya visited her hometown again, this time without cameras or reporters. Mrs. Rodriguez was retired now, living in a small house near the park. She looked older, her hair completely gray, but her smile was the same warm one Maya remembered. "I saw your work in a magazine," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "I'm so proud of you." Those words hit different coming from her. This was someone who'd believed in Maya when it wasn't easy or trendy to do so, who'd supported her quietly without expecting recognition. "I want to do something," Maya said. "A scholarship for students from our school who want to pursue creative fields. Art, design, music, whatever. I want to help kids who are in the same position I was." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes filled with tears. "That would be wonderful." They established the scholarship together, working out the details over the following months. It wasn't huge, $5,000 a year for one student, but it was something. Maya remembered how much even a small scholarship had mattered to her, how it had made an impossible dream feel almost possible. The first recipient was a boy named Tyler, who wanted to study graphic design. Maya met him when she came home for the presentation ceremony. He was nervous and excited, carrying a portfolio that reminded her so much of herself that it hurt a little. "Thank you," he said, gripping the scholarship certificate like it might disappear. "You don't know what this means," but Maya did know. She knew exactly what it meant. Her design work changed too. She was approaching 35 now, and her aesthetic had evolved. The clothes she created were still edgy, still distinctly hers, but there was something different about them. Less aggressive, more confident. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She was just making things she found beautiful. Fashion Week that year was different. Maya showed her collection, but she didn't lose sleep over reviews or worry herself sick about whether critics would love it. She'd created pieces she was proud of, and that had to be enough. The reviews were actually better than expected. One critic wrote that her work showed a maturity and depth that comes from an artist who's found balance between ambition and authenticity. Maya had dinner with her mother after the show. Her mom had flown in to see it, the first time she'd ever attended one of Maya's shows. They sat in a small Italian restaurant, just the two of them. And her mother talked about how proud she was, how amazing the collection had been. "I'm sorry I didn't support you better when you were younger," her mother said quietly. "I wish I'd believed in you the way I should have." Maya reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "You did the best you could. I understand that now," and she did. Understanding didn't erase the years of hurt, but it gave her a place to put it down. Maya's business continued to grow, but at a pace she controlled. She wasn't the biggest name in fashion, wasn't showing at the most prestigious venues or selling in the most exclusive stores, but she was profitable, creative, and most importantly, she was okay. She started dating again that fall. Nothing serious at first, just coffee dates and dinners with people who didn't know or care about her professional reputation. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have time for things that weren't work, to have energy left over at the end of the day for other people. Her mentorship program expanded to include 5 students. She met with them monthly, looked at their work, helped them navigate applications and internships and the million small challenges that came with trying to break into fashion from the outside. One of them asked her during a meeting, "Was it worth it? Everything you went through to get here?" Maya thought about the question carefully. "Yes and no," she finally said. "I achieved what I set out to do, and I'm proud of that. But I paid a price I didn't have to pay. I sacrificed things I didn't need to sacrifice. If I could do it again, I'd be kinder to myself along the way. I'd remember that proving people wrong isn't the same thing as building a life worth living." The student nodded, writing something down in her notebook. Maya looked around at these young people, all of them hungry and hopeful and terrified in ways she remembered so clearly. She couldn't protect them from struggle or disappointment or the hard work ahead, but she could be what she'd needed and never had. Someone who believed in them not because they'd already proven themselves, but because they deserved support while they were still trying to figure things out. That night, Maya sat in her apartment, not the tiny studio she'd lived in when she first moved to the city, but a real one-bedroom with natural light and space to breathe. She was alone but not lonely, tired but not exhausted, successful, but in a way that didn't feel like it was killing her. She thought about 17-year-old Maya, sitting in that kitchen in their small town, announcing her impossible dream to a family that didn't believe her. She thought about all the people who told her she'd never make it, and how desperately she'd needed to prove them wrong. She had proved them wrong, but more importantly, she'd proved something to herself. That success didn't have to mean self-destruction, that you could be ambitious without being ruthless, that you could achieve your dreams and still have enough of yourself left over to enjoy them. Maya picked up her sketchbook, something she hadn't done for pleasure in years, and started drawing. Not for a collection or a client or a deadline, just for herself, just because she loved it.